Welcome, everyone. My name is Stella, and thank you for tuning in to Bibi and Yaya, where you will hear real-life stories every week, which people have sent to us, detailing their life experiences, feelings, emotions, and reactions along the way. The people who write into us share their stories in hopes of connecting with others who may be able to give advice, comments, and opinions, such as yourself. You may have just the right solution to today's personal story. Here on Bibi and Yaya, we will also share our opinions with the hopes that we can help those who share their stories with us. If you have a story to tell, please send us an email by using the email provided in the description box below. And by hitting the thumbs up button, sharing, and subscribing to this channel, you can stay up to date with these very personal stories. This helps us to bring you new life stories and adventures every week, so you don't miss a thing. And you may hear a story here on Bibi and Yaya, which resonates with your life. If so, you can read what others have posted to help with your own personal situation. These personal stories are real, and people do need advice. You could help them. And now, let's hear about today's story. Today's story comes to us from Teresa, a woman who struggles with a drug addiction. She begins at a young age and continues her dependency on this drug for years. Teresa deals with many struggles and tries repeatedly to end her addiction, but to no avail. After having 2 children and a husband who love her, she decides to try one more time to come clean. Will she succeed or fail again with her attempts? And now, here's Teresa's story. Dear Stella, my name is Teresa, and I have this story about how I became addicted to cocaine at 19 years old, and how the so-called party drug destroyed my university dreams, relationships, and bank account. I am 34 years old now, but in my first year at the university when I was 19 years old, I tried cocaine for the first time. Despite its reputation as a party drug, that first line spiraled into a 13-year addiction, costing my relationships, a degree, jobs, and thousands of dollars worth of debt. My parents brought me up to believe drugs were awful, and if I touched them, they would kill me. So I never thought I'd even try them. I was really good at school. I got good grades, and my studies were important to me. The first time I took cocaine, I was 19 years old. I was in a relationship with someone who did it, and after an hour of him and a friend convincing me it wasn't going to kill me, I tried it. Growing up, I always felt like everyone had the manual to life, but I didn't. I felt empty inside, like something was missing. As soon as I snorted that first line, that hollow feeling went away. Drugs became my solution to life. I was at the university at the time earning a fashion degree, working 2 part-time jobs, trying to socialize, and I was also suffering from chronic fatigue. Everyone around me seemed to balance everything with absolute ease. For me, it was very difficult. But suddenly, I could do all of those things, thanks to both the energy from the coke and my newfound confidence. But it wasn't long until my magical solution backfired horrendously. This is how the addiction started. I only used coke socially at first, like when I went to a bar. It became a very normal thing for me. However, very quickly, I wanted to do it much more than my partner did. I wanted to use it all the time. Soon, I was doing it at home, when I was having a quiet night in. Within 2 years, I was using every single day, all while still studying for my degree. While the coke started off as my solution, life soon became unmanageable. I couldn't get out of bed because I was on a crash. I wasn't really turning up for lectures. I was much more interested in staying at home and using. I dropped out of the university just 3 months after starting my second year. I was in a horrendous amount of debt. My student loan had been spent on coke, and I had credit cards run up to crazy amounts just to fund my habit. My ex-boyfriend had lost his job, so he started dealing, which meant we had it in the house all the time. My relationship started to break down, and we did eventually break up. I got a job in a shop, but that became really difficult as I'd be up all night using and then going into the bathroom at work to take more. I was an exaggerated version of myself on coke. I could talk up to 100 miles per hour, and I had confidence I had never had. I could go and talk to people I would normally be intimidated by. In my head, coke was a very glamorous drug. It was what celebrities did, so it seemed acceptable. That kept me in denial for a long time. It wasn't heroin. I wasn't injecting it. I wasn't that addict, I would tell myself. It seemed to be a very socially acceptable drug. I had bouts throughout the 13 years of my addiction where I would be clean, sometimes for up to 2 years. But eventually, I would go back to it. I met the man who would become my husband when I was 25. He's never touched a drug in his life. I moved down south with him. I've moved a lot, which I can now see as running away from my addiction. And we got engaged quickly. I had told him about my past, including the debt I had accumulated, but I neglected to tell him I was still using cocaine recreationally. I was very adamant. I was not going to go down the road of drugs in my new life with him. But whenever I went back to my hometown to see family and friends, I ended up using. One weekend, I went home and took coke, methadone, and some other legal highs, anything in white powder form that I could stick up my nose. Really. From the Friday I arrived until the Sunday, I didn't sleep at all, and somehow I managed to drive home. I couldn't see or think straight. When I got to the front door, I had to come clean to my fiancé about everything. This was 2 months before our wedding. I was in such a state that I made him drive me to the hospital because I thought I was dying. It was a difficult time. I'd broken his trust, but we worked through it. We got married at 27, and everything seemed fine. I became pregnant with my first child. I was clean throughout my pregnancy, and we moved back to my hometown, where I had my first child at 28. But motherhood didn't come naturally to me. Putting a little person before myself was very hard. When we moved back, I found myself a mom of one in a remote area, and I felt very lonely. At this point, I had one friend who still took drugs. Soon enough, though, I was taking day trips with my baby to spend the day with her, and we would use together. That old empty feeling I had as a teenager became very apparent in motherhood. The coke numbed it. That hollowness would go away when I used. I never wanted a second child, but I began to think my eldest should have a sibling. Plus, if I was pregnant, I told myself, I wouldn't take any drugs because I didn't in my first pregnancy. I got pregnant, but this time it wasn't enough to keep me clean. I used cocaine the night before my 20-week scan. I remember lying on the ultrasound table, and my baby was moving around like crazy in my stomach. I just thought, I've done that to you. What have I done? I didn't use any more in my pregnancy after that. It terrified me. Now, 30 years old, I gave birth again. I wasn't able to breastfeed my second born, but to be honest, I was relieved because I wanted to do coke. I had postnatal depression, 2 young children, and a new renovation project my husband had signed us up for. My answer to all that stress, plus my chronic pain, was coke. I went back to using on a daily basis, and my husband still didn't know. I had set up my own business, which meant I could very easily hide money. My business account paid money into my joint account, but I kept some of it to fund my addiction. Within 1 year, I had spent over $14,000 on coke. After that year, I made the decision that I no longer wanted to take coke. I could see what it was doing. My work had become unmanageable. There were too many questions from my husband. My moods were awful, and I knew I was out of control. Every morning, I'd wake up thinking, how could I get the money, and how could I hide it? It was exhausting, and I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't stop. I came clean to my husband, even though I was terrified. He told me we could work through things, and he could take control of my finances. I went for counseling, but talking about coke made me want it, so I would leave therapy and pick it up on the way home. Then the pinnacle moment came. One day, I asked family to look after my children and said I was popping out to the shop. I went to my dealer's house, got a load of expensive, pure coke, a couple of bottles of wine, and used all night at home until 6 the next morning when I had had a fit. My heart was through my chest, and I thought I was dying. I wanted to die because I didn't know how to stop my addiction, and I knew I was hurting everyone around me. Despite this health scare, and the fact my husband and mother found out as an ambulance was called, 2 days later, I was driving to my drug dealer's house, crying my eyes out again. I used until 2 a.m. when I decided to Google treatment centers. I spent one last day with my children and then admitted myself to a 30-day rehab program. I was absolutely terrified and was physically shaking on the way. I was completely ready to stop. I couldn't do it to myself or my family anymore. This was my last chance. The rehab doctor looked at my nose and told me I had damaged it. It was constantly dripping and I had a permanent cut. It was a relief to go to the group therapy and have all these people who knew what I was going through. I finally realized that I was really sick. I wasn't this horrible, disgusting human being I thought I was. I actually had an illness, and it needed to be treated. My husband was a good earner. I had a house, car, and my kids were well dressed. Everything was picture perfect. But on the inside, I was dying. We have a really stereotypical idea of what an addict looks like, but I was a high-functioning addict for many years, holding down a job and looking after children. On the outside looking in, there was nothing wrong. But in reality, something was desperately wrong. Eventually, after all my treatment, the urge to use just went away. My life today is so different. All the materialistic stuff that used to matter to me doesn't now. That was me being really sick and trying to put on a mask so no one could see me on the inside. I stopped working to spend more time doing one of the things I feared the most, being a mother. I love that I can be fully present for my children, something I never thought I would be able to do or enjoy. Sadly, last year my mom got diagnosed with cancer, but I have helped her through her chemotherapy, radiation, and helped nurse her back to health. Rather than being the constant worry I'd been to her for 13 years, I was finally able to step up and be there for her. Life really is so much simpler today. Wow. It's amazing how Teresa was able to stop using cocaine after so many years of being addicted to it. She had gone through much pain and anxiety about her frequent use and addiction to this very dangerous drug. Teresa wasn't the stereotypical drug addict, so perhaps this made it easier for her to hide her habit. After many struggles, She finally takes the step needed by going into therapy and becoming clean. She realized that her addiction was an illness and she desperately needed help. It was imperative for Teresa to get the help she sought so she could care for herself and her 2 young children. Good for you, Teresa, and we wish you all the best with your new life. Today's quotes relating to Teresa's story are, number 1, addiction is nothing but voluntary madness. And number 2, by keeping an open mind, sooner or later, we find the help we need. Do you believe you may have the right solution or best advice for Teresa? If so, we would like to hear from you. And you can read other people's comments, solutions, and opinions below relating to these real-life stories. They could very well mirror your own thoughts, or they could be quite different from yours. Remember that by liking and subscribing to Bibi and Yaya, you will hear me read letters every week which people send us about issues they are dealing with in their lives. These are real-life personal stories and people's everyday experiences. And don't forget, if you have a personal story or issue which you would like to share with us, please send us an email using the email provided in the description box below. We would be happy to hear from you and offer advice on how to deal or cope with your personal experience. Thank you for joining us today, and see you next time here on Bibi and Yaya.